It's no secret that many people, myself included, think the Forza Horizon games of today are a pretty drastic dip in quality in comparison to the Forza Horizon of yesteryear, to the point where just about every content creator with a large enough following has spoken out outwardly against the modern Horizon games. Though despite this, I've begun to see a large influx of players who seem to believe that the old Forza games are overrated and the modern ones are just as good, if not better. In the comments of my own videos, others' videos, and in our Discord server, I've had a relative amount of people ask why people regard the older Horizon games as better. So instead of dismissing that, the point of this video is to answer the people who ask us questions as to why we view these games in such a more positive light in comparison to their newer titles. To begin, let's clarify what Old Horizon means. I like to think of the core trilogy of Horizon 1, 2, and 3 make up what I'm going to refer to as the classics, while Horizon 4 and more relevantly Horizon 5 make up the modern. Being with that most of us grew up with the classics, it's hard to come at this series from the perspective of a newcomer, and vice versa. If you told me in 2018 that a large majority of the player base hadn't even played Horizon 2, I'd be shocked. Though now in 2024, I'd imagine that a mere fraction of Horizon 5's player base haven't touched the classics at all. While Horizon 5 has an estimated 35 million players, the most recent of the classics had reportedly sold 2.5 million copies a few months after launch. Assuming everyone who bought Horizon 3 also played Horizon 5, that is a mere 14% of people who have played both. And that's for the most recent of the classics. Horizon 2 and Horizon 1 would have an even smaller statistic. So for a vast majority of people making the claim that the classics are overrated, I'd have to assume haven't even played the games themselves. And to be fair, I can't complain them. The classics ran on a 4-year licensing agreement, which was lost, would result in the games and their DLC being permanently delisted. So from around 2020 onwards, all of the classic games have essentially become lost media, only playable through secondhand physical copies or purchased online before the licensing ended. This made even harder with the fact that most Xbox consoles these days don't have a disc drive to play secondhand games, resulting in the task of playing these classic games to be very tedious if not impossible for most people. This inaccessibility has in turn led to ignorance from players who are unable to play a game that they want to form an opinion on, in turn forming their opinion from this initial negative bias and then confounded by others who think similarly. But of course, this group of people aren't the only ones with a negative bias towards the classics. There are of course people with the hardware available to run secondhand copies and still don't view these games in a positive light in comparison to the modern titles, which brings in the next important point of contention for when you judge a game, and that's when it's played. Many people who dislike the classics are coming at them from a 2024 mindset, a decade removed from the release of these games. And with the advancement of technology, games will improve over time, and so do our expectations of them. Horizon 4 and Horizon 5 are obviously going to run a lot better, have bigger car lists and a greater lifespan than the classics. Though what's not being considered in these analysis of the classics is when they came out. For instance, we don't praise the original Super Mario Bros. For what it is now and how it holds up to Mario Odyssey. Instead, we praise it for how revolutionary it was for the industry and its legendary status. This of course on a lesser scale is the same for the classic Horizons. From 2012 to 2016, there was nothing like what Horizon was. The only games of a similar nature being The Crew 1 and Need for Speed 2015, and both had a laundry list of issues that the classic Horizons simply perfected in their era. And with each game simply improving upon the last and satisfying fan demands, it's no wonder why these games were loved in their heyday. Nowadays, Horizon has to complete with The Crew 2 and Motorfest, Need for Speed Heat and Unbound, the upcoming Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, and to a smaller degree the modding scene of games like Assetto Corsa and BeamNG. But most importantly of all though, it's older counterparts. Well, of course, the classics have aged in some regards. What they were for their time is something that cannot be understated and must be part of the discussion when analyzing these games, or any game for that matter. Compounding on this list is yet more of what the classics could offer in their heyday that just isn't available anymore. The culture and build-ups of these games were immense. The speculation and reveals are something that back in the day generated so much more impact than Horizon 5's reveal of one car at a time over Twitter. For the players that remember Forza Hub, an in-console app that would constantly update with news and rewards for longtime players. During the release of Horizon 3, I vividly remember checking Forza Hub every week, see amazing new additions with in-game screenshots of cars like the Aerial Nomad, Holden Sadman, 2017 2017 GTR and the insane new edition of the Reliant Supervan. The feeling of playing a demo every day until launch is really something that can only be experienced once. The magic of the discovery of a fresh new world, with so many new features, finding new roads and trails, finally being unbound from the demo's closed-off map, and driving into the wild orange outback in Horizon 3 is an experience that I'll never forget. The fact that we would get monthly DLC packs of the most modern fan-requested cars like the Vulcan, Crown Vic, Gen 2 NSX, and Zonda R were always incredibly exciting. Back in the day, Forza had a smaller car list, so every new edition came with so much weight. While compared to nowadays, where we do get cars every week, some of them being from previous games, lose so much impact as to what the games of the past could offer in terms of generating excitement when something like the Sylvia S14 would be put into a Horizon title for the first time. It especially doesn't help the comparison when Horizon 5 and 4's launch were broken to the point of not even working online for a few days. Because obviously we don't live in 2014 or 2016 anymore, only those were the time where players could experience things like Forza Hub or the discovery of a new map, and this will remain only to those who were there at the time. While these days, a player going into the classics already knows what to expect. They've seen the map's layout on Google or in videos a bunch of times already. Playing Horizon 2 and seeing a relatively compact car list to what we have now will certainly be off-putting to newer players in this series. The idea that nostalgia is the only reason we like these games more than the new ones is simply a false notion from newer players who want to defend the games that they're more familiar with. These games were entirely different beasts back in the day, something that to this day hasn't been replicated with this new style of presentation. Forza having moved to Twitter for all of its news releases feels so much more corporate and people-pleasing compared to the more tight-knit community we used to have. But all of this has been an explanation of how time affects perception of a game. There are, of course, objective merits of the classics that they hold over the modern titles. Horizon 1 obviously being the benchmark, but having the best campaign of the whole series. Horizon 2 still hitting with the most dynamic weather, bringing the Horizon series into a new age which it still hasn't moved on from stylistic-wise. With still to this day some of the most gorgeous driving roads the series has ever seen, Horizon 3 taking what 2 did and improving on it in near every aspect. With the best additions of cars seen in the series' history, the addition of wide bodies, drone mode, Forza Edition cars, the auction house, and our first ever post-launch support and semi-live service. The modern titles have obviously still made strides and improvements on the old formula, but never with the same gravity as to what something like Horizon 3 was able to add, and even in some places regressing. Horizon 3 still had objectively the most diverse map, with beautiful set pieces wherever you went that all felt so different from the last, because no corner of the map was like another. In comparison to the modern titles, which have maps that pretty much follow a single theme, Horizon 4 is green everywhere, while Horizon 5 is brown everywhere. If you were to show me a screenshot from Horizon 5, I couldn't tell you where in the map it was taken, while in Horizon 3 it would be immediately obvious to differentiate the Outback from Surfer's Paradise, to the rainforest to Byron Bay. It's little things like this that help the classics not just be a stepping stone for the franchise, but instead lay their own individual entries with their own merits that are worth replaying. How many people do you think will return to Horizon 5 after, say, Horizon 7 is the current title in 2029? I don't see many, that's for sure. So I ask you, if you believe the older Horizon games to be overrated and not as good as the modern titles, ask yourself these two questions. Have you played the classics? If you have, wouldn't you play them? Forming biases based on something that you have not experienced will only spread misinformation. If you're going to critique a classic Forza title, make sure to inform that it's from the perspective of someone who has played it a decade after release. Because assessing games by our modern standards is of course a very important part of any modern discourse. Without learning from the past, we'll simply repeat the same mistakes. That is why it's still valid to critique any game from any time period, but it's just as important to consider games from their time of release and the impact that they had back then. If you want more specifics on what makes each Forza game so great, or comparatively not great, there's plenty of videos on this channel going over each Horizon title individually. So to answer the question of why people think the older Horizon games are overrated, I believe it to be a lack of understanding and a lack of perspective. That being said, everyone's opinion on this franchise is valid and should be appreciated. After all, no Forza game is perfect, nor is any terrible, unless we're including the Motorsport reboot. So forming our opinions on these games is personal preference, and at the end of the day, that's all that it is.